All yours.
Uh, okay. So hi everyone. This is Prabhu.
Hi, this is Shravanthi,
We both work here as I'm working as a BA on the Bahmni team.
and I'm a developer in Bahmni team.
Right. So today we are here to give you an overview of OpenELIS. And since I'm assuming, if you've known about Bahmni, you must be knowing that it is one of the three uh, founding open source tools on basis of which we have completed our EMR functionality. So just to give you brief overview of OpenELIS, it is a lab information system, and OpenELIS stands for Electronic Lab Information System, and it is open source. And let's get right into it. So what we'll be discussing today, the way we have structured this session, is that let's go and see a functional overview of the functionality that OpenELIS has to offer. We can discuss stuff that is a part of the OpenELIS functionality, that is like the lab dashboard. How do you add samples? What is the procedure for adding patients results? And then we'll be moving on to the administration bit. This is the general agenda for today's call. So let's start by looking at the app. Okay. This is the OpenELIS login screen, and this is the OpenELIS that we have set up in one of our environments. And we have an OpenMRS instance also set up on the same environment, which syncs to this OpenELIS. We'll be talking about that as we get into it. Let's start by logging in. We have a user called admin. Right. So we are logged in. As soon as we log in, what we see right now is called the lab dashboard. So basically, an lab management system requires you to collect details about samples and what tests are to be conducted against that sample. And then finally, what results are recorded for the tests that are to be conducted against that sample. Now, this lab dashboard gives you a view of all the samples that have been collected or the samples that are yet to be collected. So you can see that there are two queues here. One is samples to collect and one is samples collected. Now, the difference here is that the samples collected are the samples that are physically being taken for the patient from the patient, sorry. And the samples to collect are orders that are synced from another site, from our Bahmni clinical site, that were ordered for a particular patient, but the patient has not physically turned up at the laboratory so that his or her sample can be collected. If that difference is clear, let me look at the two queues, the two sub queues that are a part of both of these queues. You see that both the samples collected and the samples to collect queue have the today and backlog section. Quite like intuitive. The today queue shows you the patient's sample that has been collected today or has been ordered today, and the backlog lists all the samples that have been collected till date. Similarly, for the samples collected, you can see that these are the two patients for which two samples have been collected right now, and the backlog will show you all the samples that have been collected so far. Now, a question that might come to your mind would be that why does the backlog queue of samples to collect have such a long queue? This is one of our environment that where we've just ordered a lot of things and not actually collected the samples for many of them, which is why this information shows this way. Let's go and add a sample now. So this is the scenario in which, just for the users, this is the lab management person who will be using this software. And at this moment, if the patient arrives at the lab and you want to record what sample is being collected for the patient, you go to the sample dropdown. When you go there, you can see that you can add a sample or you can edit an existing sample. Let's try adding a new sample. So a prerequisite for adding a sample is that you have patients in the system. Okay, so by going to the patient drop down, you can add or edit patients. But before I do that, let me just tell you that we have already have a lot of synced patients from our system, and you can also create patients already. So let me just search for a patient. I have a patient for whose medical profile I've opened up here in Bahmni. That is, the name is patient of the patient is Pandro Pandro. So if I search for the patient, I can see that there are a couple of patients that turn up with the same name. I confirm that the patient that I am looking for is SEM 157. So this is this patient. Okay. I select the patient. Now, in the real life scenario, what would happen is that this patient would be aware of the identifier, right? And this is just sample data that we are dealing with. I select now, once I've selected the patient that I want to add a sample for, I select what is the type of the sample. So once we go through the functional overview, we'll have a look at how we can set up these sample types and how we can set up the different tests that can be performed on the sample. Shravanthi would be having a look at that. So I select the sample. Say I have to collect a blood sample for this patient. I select blood and then I do an add sample. When I do an add sample, I see that the screen below populates with the list of panels that can be performed for this particular sample and a list of available tests. Now, panels are nothing but a grouping of tests. So there are some standardized panels that can be performed on blood samples, and they are listed here. If I select a panel, say the anemia panel, I see that there is a list of tests that gets populated here, and simultaneously the tests that form a part of this panel are ticked in the available test section. As you can see, I cannot deselect them as of now. So the reason being that if I'm performing a performing a panel test on a particular sample, then these results would be generated. On top of this, what I can do is I can have some other tests that are not a part of any sample or not a part of this sample, pardon me, and I can select them to be performed on this blood sample too. Now, when I am done with selecting the tests and panels that I would want to perform on this blood sample, I select. So what now I need to do is I need to uniquely identify this sample. So that's how normally labs work. That once they've taken a blood sample from the patient, they need a unique identifier for that blood sample, so that that can be mapped to the patient, and then the test results are then entered for the correct patient. I see that there is this accession number that denotes the unique identifier for this sample, and I have a button here to generate this sample. So what I can do is, if I click on generate, I see that the system generates a sample, an accession number for this particular sample. Now there is other information like where has the sample been collected, or what was the date that the sample was received. I can also say that this is the name of the doctor or the provider that has requested this test, and then I save this information. Once I save this information, see that the save was successful. Now, if I go back to my lab dashboard, I can see that in the samples collected section, the patient for which I just collected a sample, I have the accession number of the sample. And I can see that there are 14 tests pending on this, and there are 0 pending validation because the tests themselves are pending, and there are a total number of 14 tests to be performed on this sample. So this is where you'll see, if whenever you're adding a sample on the ELIS, from ELIS, you'll be seeing them in the samples collected section. Now, if there are no results entered for this sample in this particular day, this sample would stop showing in the today queue and would start showing up in the backlog queue. At this moment, I'd just like to pause and ask if there are any questions so far.
So Tim had put a question on the chat where he was asking about whether the samples collected section shows all the outstanding samples, including the ones which are today and earlier, and how do you define the backlog? Is backlog everything that is not today?
Yeah, backlog is everything that is not today. So basically, the only filter that we have is for today. That's the way we've designed it right now. That the samples that are collected today will be shown in this queue, and everything behind this will be shown in the backlog queue.
I think we can see till 1,000 entries right now.
Yeah.
So Vinay, do you want to take this question?
I think the question got answered. So
Right.
yeah,
So
it's clear.
basically, everything other than the samples that are collected today, as soon as like the date would change from today, the sample would start showing up in backlog, and the backlog currently shows all the samples that have been collected so far.
So
I think that
the
yeah,
the rationale is most, at least in the labs that we've seen, things like hemoglobin microscopy or get done in the same day. So it's for, so if you're working on tests that get done in a single day, you typically be using the today's tab, where it's really easy to just go pick up what you want. And if you're not doing it today, it's either I mean, there's something wrong with it, or it's something that will take more than a day to complete. So that goes into the backlog. So if people who are doing things like culture tests, it will go into the backlog, and you would typically be searching only in one queue. So at least that's the rationale behind the design of these two tabs.
Yeah, the reason why I asked is that we have a principle that most of those quick tests, we have a 3-hour turnaround, and we need that because our patients come a long way and we need them to actually be able to be processed completely in one day, because they may have traveled a day or two to get here. So that's one of the things. So we actually have an expectation that all of the tests that are not, like cultures and things that take 3-5 days, to actually have a turnaround of about 3 hours. And so we actually have a warning to the lab at the moment when a test hasn't been completed, that's been where the sample has been taken but the test not completed within 3 hours. So we need that's why I was wondering whether there's a way of whether that ordering is by the time of the thing, or at least you can see how long they've been in the queue. It's something that would be important for us.
Okay. So right now, at least the way people handle this is by the sample number. So the way it's set up here is the date followed by the uh, the uh, number on which it was, I mean, when it was collected. So what I've seen people do is just order it by the sample accession number and see which ones are really taking long. But if you think time is something that is worth adding, we can definitely add that. But at the same time, it's more like there's a lot of them, like there's a lot of times, right? So uh, unless it's really done, it's not done. So I thinking about the sample collection time here.
That's the relevant, that is really the relevant one, because that's the perception for the patient. Once they've given the thing, we basically have this idea that once they've given their sample within 3 hours, they'll get their results, or at least the results will be available to the doctor to be able to see them for that follow-up from the test, and then allow them to do any prescriptions and things and finally leave. So that's why the 3-hour time things. And then we have another thing where we actually put on a lab test that it's an ASAP, so it's a very important to be done straight away. So they're ones also that we need to flag, so that the lab staff, particularly if it's an inpatient where they go and collect the sample, that's one where the sample to collect needs to be high priority and high priority.
So do you have a way of breaking this down and like, I will note this down, Tim, and I'm not really sure how to get these things into the product and onto the roadmap, but I'll definitely take a note of these two things and see how we can take this forward.
Right. Uh, yeah, we've noted that down, Tim. Right, and so moving ahead, right? We had just added a new sample for a patient, and we can see that it has 14 pending tests. Now, I'd just quickly like to show you the difference of when we order a test from Bahmni. So what we can do is, if I go to consultation of this patient and I look at orders, what I can see is that a similar setup has been done in Bahmni. We have different types of samples here. And if I select a sample, say I've selected blood, see if I select serum, the panels change. If I select blood, I can see the same panels and the same lab tests that are a part of the LS UI that we just saw. So if I select one routine blood test here, I can see that the tests that form a part of the routine blood panel are selected, and I can see the order that I placed for this patient. If I save this information now, and for those of you who've attended the previous Atom Feed session, you might be aware about this sync already, that whenever I save information here for the lab orders, it gets synced through Atom Feed to the OpenELIS here. So if I refresh the dashboard now, and I go to samples to collect, I can see that there's the test that I had just ordered for this patient listed here. And as I mentioned before, the reason why we have this in the samples to collect section is because right now the doctor has just ordered, the doctor or medical provider has just ordered the test from Bahmni and or from the EMR side. And this test has been, this test information has been synced to the lab information software, but we do not have the patient physically present in the lab so that his or her sample can be collected. Now, when the patient finally arrives, what this lab manager would do is you physically collect the sample and you click on the collect sample button here that is listed with it. So I see that the test that I had selected, all the information about the patient and about the tests that were ordered about the patient are pre-filled on the same collect sample screen. And I just have to create the accession number for that sample. So I generate, at this point, I can add some more tests also for this patient if the lab manager believes that is important. And I can generate an accession number for it. Now, when I save this, I can see that that patient's name no longer appears in the sample to collect queue, but rather starts appearing in the samples collected queue. So this is the sample. The 002 accession number is the sample that we had added from LS, and the 003 accession number sample is the one that we synced from MRS, that is from the EMR side. Now, let me quickly get on to how we enter results for a particular sample. So suppose I want to, finally, the tests that were scheduled for this sample have been performed and I would want to enter the results. You see that you, first of all, you go to the lab dashboard and you go to the queue. If the sample has been collected, then you go to the samples collected queue in today or backlog. For now, I am in the today queue because I would want to enter the results for this particular patient's tests. I go to the result. I can see that there is a result page that gets populated. For each of the tests that has to be performed, there is a normal limit, that normal range that is also mentioned here. Say I have the results for the hemoglobin test and the platelet count. And the MCH. Now these are the three tests for which I have results as of now. And I can also upload some supporting file if I would want to for the proof of this result. Now I save this information. At this moment, we are assuming that we do not have all the test results. We only have these three particular test results. So I can see that for this patient, the pending tests goes down to 11. And I can see that 3 tests are pending validation, because we've just entered results and OpenELIS gives us a feature to validate the results that are entered. Now what I can do is, now since the results have been entered for these 3 tests, maybe there is a lab manager that would validate these things in the use case. I go to validate, I can see these 3 test results. I can select accept or reject for each of the tests, or abnormal, or I can do an accept all or a reject all here. At this point, I can save this test, save this information. Now I see that the 3 tests that were pending validations are no longer here, and only the pending tests can be seen. And this information for this patient would be synced back to the EMR side so that these results can be visible on the patient's dashboard. If I look at the lab results, I can see that there are the 2 tests, but it takes some time to sync the results back. Pardon me for that. Okay, we'll get back to that later. So we've just seen how to add a sample and how to add results, how to add tests to that sample, and then going ahead, how to add results to this sample. Now, in case there are certain tests that I would want to refer out, and there are certain tests that are not performed in this particular laboratory, what do we do then? So I click on result. I can see that so what we can do to refer out a test is, there's a checkbox here that can be selected, and there are reasons that we can configure for referring a test out. So what we do is we select a checkbox here, that there is a column called referral reason, if you can see, right? We select that this test is being referred out, and then we can select what is the reason for referring this test out, say not available at this particular laboratory, and then I can select where is the place where I'm referring this test out. Shravanthi would be explaining how we can set up these places and the referral reasons. Uh, so say this monocyte test cannot be performed at this laboratory. I select not available at JSS and then select where it has to be referred out. And then I save this information. Now what I can do see is that there's a section called results where I have a selection of referred out tests. If I go there, I can see that the test that I had just referred out for the patient, this patient, and for this accession number, I can see it being available here. So what we can do is we can search tests here either by the patient ID. So say I search for the patient, and I can see that this is a test, or I can search by the accession number in that list. But now we see that this is the test that is available, and once the result for this test is made available, you can enter the result and you can mark this, you can give a reporting date for this. Or you can choose to cancel the referral, but at this moment I'll just like to add this, and then you save the result. Once you save the result, you can see that if I go back to the lab dashboard, I can see that the number of pending tests goes down by 1 because one of the tests was referred out, and thus the total number of tests also goes down here. You can see that there are only 13 tests for which you can add results now. You can also print the results if you click on print. And so that was the functionality for adding a sample, adding tests to a sample, and then entering results for it. Now, Sravanthi would explain about how we can add the information that is.
Now I'm going to talk about how to set up some details like department, sample, panel, test, and unit of measure, and also how to associate a test and panel, test and sample and panel, and also define what values to be chosen from drop down. So can you go to administration? If we click on administration, so the dictionary, if you see in the left drop down, the left listed items, you have dictionary on the top. So if you click on dictionary, you will see a few of the entries that you have previously seen when Prabhu is showing you when he's entering results for particular test. So any item in OpenELIS that you wanted to see as part of test result should be a dictionary entry. So if you want to add another dictionary entry, you can click on add, where you have to choose category from the drop down and whether the dictionary item is active or not and what is the item, and also the local abbreviation, which is not a mandatory thing, and you can save. If you want to edit any of the item which is already there, you can just select them and click on edit. So I'm just adding a local abbreviation and save. Okay, so you can see that it is saved. 1+ is the local abbreviation that I've added. And so the next item is organization. So if you click on organization, you can see a list of items where you can see the organization name and the parent organization, organization short, actives, address, etc. So these are the things that if you want to refer a test outside, and you can see a drop down where you wanted to refer a test. Previously, where Prabhu have listed on how to refer a test out. So these are the organization names that you can see in the drop down. So if you want to add one more organization name, just click on add and add an organization, or if you want to edit, it's the same, just select any of the item and just click on edit. So a panel, if you want to add a panel, same way, click on add. So give a panel a name, which is mandatory, and a description, what the panel indicates, which is also a mandatory field, and click on save. Or if you want to edit it, please select the item and then click on the edit button. A panel item is an association between a test and a panel. What all tests belong to a panel, you have to specify a panel item. Let's say anemia panel, the absolute eosinophil count belongs to anemia panel. So this is the panel test association. So if you want to add another test in anemia panel, just add another entry. And if you want to edit it, just select the item and then click on edit. So in sample add, whenever you click anemia panel, so few of the tests get selected automatically. So these are the tests that get selected automatically when you click anemia panel, since they have association with panel and test. So let's look at how to add a test. So this is the same way. You have to click on add, and then you have to add a test section, which is department, which has to be present already. So if you want to add a test that belongs to biochemistry department, so the biochemistry department has to be present before that. And give a test the name and description, which are mandatory again, and just say if it is active or not. And you can also give a unit of measure for the test. So I'll talk about the drop down that populated here later. And you can also mention if this test is referred out, or if this test is exist in your organization, and then click on save. Or if you want to edit any of the item in this test section, sorry, test, you can just click on that item and just click edit. So if so the test result, so each and every test has a type. So it can be a drop down, and can be numeric, and can be remark. So for example, let's say it's a drop down, and whenever you add a result for a test, you can see the drop down list auto populated. So for example, this albumin, I can specify the value that has to be populated in the result value, which has to be a dictionary item again. So 4 plus. So this way you can give what all values to be uh, appeared in the drop down list for albumin test. So let's say I want 5 plus uh, to be a value of albumin test. I have to add another entry in this uh, for that particular test. With the result value 5 plus, which has to be a dictionary value, and then select whether it is abnormal or not, and just save. So the result, so this 5 plus already exists, so that's why it's throwing an error. So this is how you add another item in the drop down for this particular test. So test section, as I already spoke about, it's a department. You have to specify the departments prior to the test addition. So each test should be belong to a department. That's mandatory. So if you want to add a new department, just click on add and fill in the department name and organization, and whether it is external or not, and the description, or also if it is active or not, which are mandatory fields, and then click on save. So I already talked about panel and test association. So we also have an association between sample and panel. So if you click on add sample of particular sample, you see some of the panels populated already, and also the tests populated. So the sample panel association is through this. If you have so let's say blood ADTA is selected, uh, what are panels that has to be auto populated should be a member of this section here, and give a so let's say I want APTT also part of blood ADTA. I have to add an entry here by clicking on add sample ADTA and the panel APTT, and just click save. So you will see APTT auto populated whenever you click on blood ADTA sample. So sometimes you want few tests that might not be belong to a panel, but that has to appear as part of a sample. So this is like test sample association. So you can specify this association here by clicking on add, selecting the sample from drop down, and also the test from drop down. You can add a sample and test association. As I already told, like you can click any of the item and edit it by just selecting it. And unit of measure is something we already saw. For each test, you can specify what unit of measure it holds. So these are the items that gets populated in the drop down when you create a test. So if you want to add one more, just click on add and just give a unit of measure name and the description, and then click save. If you want to edit it, just select the item and then click on edit button, and then save it. And the other thing is health centers. Uh, you can add in health center names. These are the things that are prefixed for a patient ID. Just click on add and add what the respective health center name.
So all of the information that we've just tried showing you is the information that we were seeing while we were adding a sample or patient. So if we do an add sample, right, all of the information that is coming here is what Shravanti just explained how we can set up.
Yeah.
Like what are the values that are populated in the sample type drop down, and then
Sample type drop down, you get all the sample types here.
Yeah.
And add a sample. When you add a sample, you see the panels auto populated and the tests auto populated. So all the tests that have association with this particular sample type will come up here, and all the panels that have association with this particular sample will come up here. If I select one of the panel, all the tests that have been associated with this particular panel will be auto selected, and you can't deselect them, as Prabhu already mentioned. So this is how it works. And the referred out tests, so if you can see, these are the institutes or organizations that we have configured already. So you can select it from here. This is how the organization name comes up here. And if you have to enter, sorry. So I'm clicking on lab dashboard to show how you can select a result from drop down that I have already showed you how to configure. Let's say I click on this thing, Sharda patient. And if you can see, these are the drop down that you have already configured. And for each test, we can configure a unit of measure when you add a test. And one thing is you can also configure the limits for a result, which I'll show you. Result limits in administration, if you click result limits, so for each test, a numeric test for example, you can specify um, what is a low value and what is a high value, what is a normal range and what is a valid range. So if you can click on add and select a test from drop down and the result type, and give the normal range high and low and the valid range, then save. So you can also edit it by selecting the item and clicking on the edit button. So this is how we can configure the OpenELIS things. Any questions?
I just wanted to add one piece to it. So if you're using Bahmni and Bahmni, OpenMRS, and ELIS together, and if you want results to sync between the two, ideally what you would be doing is setting up all these as concepts within OpenMRS and let the atom feed all the tests over to ELIS. Now, most of the information, including sample types, panels, and tests would be set up in OpenMRS as concepts, and they would flow down to OpenELIS in the through the atom feeds. There are some extra configuration that you can do in so specifically to Tim's question whether limits can be age gender specific. OpenMRS does not allow this, but OpenELIS does. So what we do is once the concepts flow in as tests, we can come here and manually change the and manually create result limits at an age or a gender level, so that if there's something that's not according to the limits for a specific gender or age, it will be marked as abnormal, and that would go back to OpenMRS or the Bahmni UI and show up as abnormal.
Right.
Any questions?
I had just one more question around what Vinay mentioned. So Vinay mentioned certain things can be configured in OpenMRS and they flow into OpenELIS. Is there any configuration in OpenELIS that needs to flow back into OpenMRS or can? Like for instance, if we add a test, it doesn't go back into OpenMRS, right? It'll stay in LS and it wouldn't be sort of recommended in that case. Just wanted to clarify that.
That's correct.
Okay. So the only data that flows from OpenLS back to OpenMRS would be the lab order result values.
Yes.
Result values as well as the fact whether they were in the normal range or not.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions, or would you want us to revisit some section of explanation that we gave?
There are some, tests that you do where you get a numeric value if it's, within range of the equipment that does the test, or you get a value that says basically greater than, because it hasn't been measured accurately, but it's greater than. So the value is either numeric or essentially textual, depending on its result from the equipment. So I didn't see how when you set up a test, whether you could have the same test having both numeric, either numeric or textual, but for the same test in the same time frame. So it's not as if it was numeric and now it's textual or vice versa, but just so that you can enter a result that's either text or numeric, depending on what the answer to what the equipment's given. Normally it's an automatic test. It's a test that's a machine-based test.
So I believe that OpenELIS does not have this functionality to have multiple result types for it. But what could be done is, in this case, either we could choose to go with a free text type of result, wherein you could enter the result as numeric if it is within that normal range, and or you could just enter that the statement greater than XYZ in that field itself, or you could choose to have all of these as an options in drop down. Say there are ranges, say a test has ranges from 10 to 20 or 20 to 30 or greater than 30, so you could configure each of these values as one of the values in a drop down. So I'm just thinking of a workaround, but I don't believe that OpenELIS allows you to have different types of results for one test, like
Yeah, it's the greater than that's the most common one we have, where the equipment can only measure it to in a certain range, and if it's outside that range, if it was a cheap test, what they would do is dilute the sample and redo it and just scale it according to the dilution. But if it's an expensive test, it's just not, it's not practical to do that. And if they know the value is going to be out of range, they could do the dilution, to get the right scaling before they did the test. But that's something that they often don't. It's just that it's just one of those things that we actually see in real life, and you actually want to indicate that it's out of range somehow in the thing. So
we have the facility to mark it as abnormal, right? Whenever a test result is entered and it is out of range, and you would want to call it as out of range, you have the ability. Let me just go back and show you. Just a second. So say I want to enter the result for the same patient.
but can you indicate whether it's high or low?
No, I believe not. What can be done is that after you've entered a value, you can flag it as abnormal. I'm assuming in the case that, say, this is greater than 600, right? You just enter a value that is quite large and then you flag it as abnormal. That could be one of the ways of, okay, I'm not even, right? Yeah. So it automatically marks it as abnormal, and abnormal can be ticked for the values which do not have like a normal range. So suppose basophil has an answer that you would want to say greater than, and then you mark it as abnormal. So this is what can be done. Does this possibly sound like a solution?
I'm not sure I mean, putting in a numeric value suggests that you've actually measured it, so that's a bit awkward.
Not about that. So this was, if you
Yeah.
keep the result type as a free text and then you
Yeah.
enter the free text saying greater than whatever, and then you mark it as abnormal. In case you have a precise numeric value, you could just give that numeric value. And
Right, but then you've got the problem that it can't do the automatic range checking
that
that
is
you
true.
get with the normal numeric one. So, you know, you can do that, but then you lose your automatic range, testing, particularly if it's age, if the actual range is one that is a bit dynamic depending on age and gender. That could be a bit tricky if you don't actually, when you go to enter it, you've actually got to know, oh, the normal range for this patient is this, or is that what's being put down there? Is that actually being done by all the filters that are approached to a range?
Yeah,
Like it says 100 to 600, but is that based on the age and gender of the patient?
uh, Vinay, I'm not too sure about this. Can you answer this question? That is this range based on the age and gender of the person?
That one ideally should be. I'll have to go back check code to see if that really is true.
Okay, that sounds good. The other one is, I did see you could add a note
Yes,
so that
you can add notes to
you, can you add it to us? You can't add it to a specific test, or you can?
You can. You have a notes section associated with each of them.
Oh, right. Okay, well, that can solve the problem. That, to me, is the best way of handling one of those out of range ones, because you actually put on it what happened when it was numeric, and you said this is out of range. It was actually greater than this, rather than putting in the exact value.
Correct. That could be one of the solutions. Yeah.
So
I think
one
that's a
problem with that of that would be that if you don't put in a value, the test would still show up as not complete.
Yes.
That could be irritating. That's the only drawback. So we'll have to find a way to get around it.
Yeah, because the notes are
But
normally used to depict stuff like this test is pending or some additional information.
yeah,
Stuff like
does the note go back to OpenMRS?
Yes.
yes.
Oh, good.
So Tim, can you give some examples of tests where it's beyond the equipment range?
It happened to us recently, and I just trying to remember what there was about 2 months ago or something. So I just remember that the test could test up to 7. I think it was something to do with diabetic patients. It wasn't glucose, but it was something else. I might be wrong on that. The standard test could go up to 17, but the actual value that could happen, the equipment could test up to 17, 0 to 17, or 17 and a half. But there was also a procedure where they could dilute the sample, and it would then give you, because I think it was essentially a percentage. So by diluting the sample, they could then, if they did a 2-to-1 dilution, they could then get a value from 0 to 35, but with a much bigger error band. So the normal thing was to do the small ones where the error band was relatively small, but if it was up in the 20s and 30s, it would just show us more than 17 on the equipment. So that was one that was happening to us, and it was one they were just saying, oh, how do we solve this problem? They just ended up writing notes and putting in a value of 17 or 18 or whatever the limit was, and saying really it was above this. But it was one of those things that I was just wondering, it happens, and therefore how you would cope with it in this system. And there's been other ones where we've seen cases where they want to put in, the number is really small, like it might be less than 0.1, but it actually wasn't 0. And they don't want to put in 0 because that just wasn't possible. But it was just so small that things, and that they wanted to be able to say really less than so and so, because we haven't actually measured what it is, but we know it was less than a given number. So those are the two cases I've seen. Is the number of decimal places on these results configurable?
No,
Okay. So do they all have to be integers, or they can be floating point, or with decimals?
it can all be floating points.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, looks like there are no more questions.
Okay.